Now, firm but fair is the phrase Priti Patel is using to describe a tougher approach to migrants. Today, the Nationality and Borders Bill began its journey through Parliament. The backdrop to the bill is the arrival of record numbers of migrants in boats across the Channel, more than 2,000 in the last month alone. The bill proposes to make arriving in the UK without permission a new criminal offence, as well as introducing longer maximum prison sentences for those coming to the UK illegally. To make it harder for adult migrants to pose as children, to downgrade the status of asylum seekers who escape deportation as well, and set a maximum life sentence tariff for those convicted of people smuggling. Well, let's turn to Tony Smith, the former Director General at UK Border Force, who joins us now. Tony Smith, thanks very much indeed for your time this evening. We're told that within this bill there are effectively new rules of engagement for Border Force that will allow people who work for Border Force to use, quote, reasonable force. How will that work?
Well, good evening. Yes, there has been a problem in terms of maritime interventions and our capabilities on in intercepting vessels on the Channel, because it's a relatively new problem for the UK Border Force, not for other countries, where we are required to board vessels and detain vessels. And so I think that actually enables us to plug that gap. But let's be clear, the Border Force, the main mission of the Border Force in the English Channel, first and foremost, is to save lives. And we're out there making sure that people don't drown, making sure that people are safe and well. But having done that, we do need to have proper powers to enable us to conduct maritime intervention operations in the same way as other countries who are more versed in this than us, such as the Mediterranean and around the US border, are able to do.
Given that, and listening to me enumerating the points that some of the points that will make it into the bill, do you think this is a bill that will make enough of a difference?
It's really hard to tell at the moment because there are some measures in there that are very bold. The attempt to distinguish people arriving from what they term safe third countries, such as France, from others, I think is a bold one, because ultimately this is a government that was elected largely on a ticket of taking back control of our borders. People coming across the English Channel at the moment, once they're within our territorial waters, can claim asylum, and the net effect of that is that they're brought ashore, they're introduced into a very cumbersome bureaucratic system, and at the end of the day, very few of them are being returned, you see. And so that gives encouragement to the people smugglers on the French side to recruit more people to come across and try this dangerous crossing, and we're not able to disrupt this business model. So we do need to find a way with our friends in France of disrupting that business model. And I think we need to make sure we don't conflate that issue with the much bigger problem of the global refugee crisis.
And it's fair to describe it as a business model, isn't it? There was an amazing reportage from Turkey recently by the Sunday Times, and people literally looking at a laminated sheet of prices for different ways of getting into the UK. Can we just go through some of the specific points in the bill one by one? This idea of checking the age of people who are coming into the UK. We hear these stories, don't we, about people destroying their papers. It's not in their interest to make our job easier in terms of identifying who they are and how old they are. We've had situations where sometimes people who are definitely not children are placed in foster care or in care homes where they are potentially a risk to minors. How do we determine really how old somebody is?
Well, that's been a very difficult question that's haunted the Border Force and the Asylum Directorate for a long, long time. In terms of age, what we call age dispute cases. But what happens, and we know this because we do debrief asylum seekers, of course, when they come to us, is that they are coached in certain aspects of an application. And there are certain things that will be to their advantage. One would be if they can demonstrate a case that they are below age, because minors are treated quite rightly in a different way to adults, and so people do, I'm afraid, try to cheat the system and pretend to be younger than they actually are. And it's really quite hard for us to say, well, how old somebody is. It's reliant upon various aspects of medical evidence which come into play. And then the other things which you mentioned, people are coached sometimes they very rarely have documents, quite often to conceal their identity and sometimes their nationality as well, if it will enhance their application for asylum. And these are sorts of things that are part of the package you described. When when the smugglers are in play, is that they will say, well, these are the things that you need to do. But yeah, first and foremost, all you really need to do is get up here to Calais and get in one of these boats and pay me X amount of money. And pretty well, Bob's your uncle. You'll be getting into the UK. This is what's going to happen. You'll be interviewed about a lot of things. These are the sorts of things that you should be making clear to the authorities. And at the moment, we're not really returning anybody. And so success breeds success. And that's the cycle that I'm really keen that this legislation tries to disrupt and put these smuggling gangs out of business.
And the coaching you describe, we heard from a union official, a border force union official recently, who said there's almost a sense of entitlement amongst particularly predominantly young men when they arrive at somewhere like Napier Barracks, which I know has got a question mark over its future, but they arrive there and there's almost a mob mentality sometimes, and she was fearful that it was a tinderbox potentially. I just wonder whether, in terms of the people you still talk to, presumably, in the border force, how they feel about the temperature this summer amongst those trying to get in.
Well, I think the first thing is the infrastructure that we have to receive migrants in these numbers is not very well developed. It's ill-equipped to deal with large numbers. This is temporary accommodation where border force officers and officers from immigration enforcement are deployed. They often have very little predictability about the numbers, and quite often people can be left in difficult circumstances, sometimes in unsuitable accommodation, particularly in inclement weather, to be processed. And I think there is an element there of the health and safety of the applicants, the migrants themselves, but also of the border force officers. So, we need to decide: is this going to be an ongoing, perennial issue? It's been going on for 2 or 3 years now. If it is, we need to establish a much more solid reception capability in Kent. And then the second thing we need to establish is how quickly can we process these claims and get to a point where no means no, and that you will actually be returned. I think this bill goes some way to trying to address those issues, but I do think there's going to be a real battle, particularly in the House of Lords, when we come to the tension between international law and the international, which we all subscribe to give people protection if they're genuinely fleeing persecution. These are 1951 conventions, remember, which we all ascribe to tackling international human smuggling. That's the real battle that the government has here.